Y Combinator is the world's most prestigious startup accelerator. With an acceptance rate lower than the top Ivy League universities, YC gives founders instant access to $500,000 in funding, hundreds of thousands of dollars in software credits, and a network of the world's best investors. This is Inside the Batch, where I, a YC founder, talk with other YC founders about how they got in, what they built, and what it really takes to make it. Today, I'm joined with the co-founder of Mundo AI, a batch member of mine. How you doing, Kenneth?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Sean.
Appreciate you coming on. So let's jump right into it. Could you give us the two-sentence description of Mundo AI?
Yeah, so at Mundo, we are building the world's largest and highest quality multilingual data sets, starting in particular with voice.
Awesome. So how are you collecting that data?
Yeah, so lots of different methods, but I think it obviously starts with the researcher needs, right? Because depending on the researcher needs, the quality required is very different. And so all of a sudden, you can unlock things like, oh, home studios are good enough to like, okay, we need to go to like a professional recording studio. These are, maybe even close to like a anechoic chamber in terms of the noise floor. Like it's really the full gamut.
I see. And so like in terms of how you're actually collecting it, you're just having like people that speak a language that you maybe don't have a lot of data on. Are you giving them scripts or how are you going about that?
Yeah, that also depends. And it's an interesting question because with scripting, it's sort of, the concept of like, don't think about a pink elephant. But then that's sort of the first thing that appears, right? So if you want something that's like very natural with a lot of emotions and you just want sort of like your average person to be able to do it, scripting is actually not something that works super well. But if you have professional voice actors, then maybe you can get into the realm of scripting as, where it works. But what we've actually found, again, is that the scripts then have to be not too rigid. And so again, this is something that it really depends on the client that we're working with, what they're looking for. But in terms of our, I guess, off-the-shelf data set, most of it is pretty unstructured. We're essentially saying, hey, slot us into your daily conversations, run the full gamut of emotions. We want you to be laughing, crying, angry, whatever. And we capture that data.
Interesting. Yeah. Cause I could imagine if you just script it, what's going to happen is you get a lot of this like very rigid data, kind of almost like the running joke in a lot of the AI model systems is who knew that the greatest technology of the next 20 years is going to be just reciting Reddit answers from some guy 5 years ago. And you're trying to basically get like more authentic raw data. Am I right in that?
Yeah, exactly. There are these very small things in the details that are like increasingly difficult. For example, things that they call back channels, where as you're talking, I'm sort of nodding, going like, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's hard to get those things like completely natural, and you can imagine in a script, it's kind of awkward if you're like, okay, 10 seconds in, do like a mm-hmm, or do like a, like a gas or something like that.
Yeah. That makes sense. So you just have to have like more natural conversations.
Yeah.
It's interesting because you as an AI company, you're focusing on something that so few other companies are, where so many people are focused on actually like building the newest models. But you guys at Mundo are focused on a totally different area, actually the input layer, the data itself. Why do you think that that layer itself is so neglected?
Yeah, I guess I have a few theories. I don't know the actual true reason, but um, you know, I think as you mentioned, like if we just like view this industry, if you think about what's like the sexy work, right? It is sort of the research, right? You see Meta posting these researchers for these huge $1 million salaries, and it's like, oh yeah, they're gonna figure out like a new algorithm. Maybe it's like a new paradigm in like building models, and everything will be like super awesome. And that's sort of like where the focus has just always been. And the less, I guess, glamorous the work is in the data itself. And so I think that's reason number one. Number two is just that in the past, the data that's been used has been things where you can just crawl the internet, right? If you're Google, you have access to YouTube, all of that. So in terms of like the efficiency of grabbing it's relatively easy for them. But now we're at a stage where the data has become increasingly specialized, and difficult to get. And so, we're just reaching a point where people are going, oh, okay, we actually need like specialized data providers who's willing to go through all this work, right? As a concept, it's simple, but when you actually go and do it, it really is a very like nasty problem. And I can even see how for certain like bigger companies, the fact that they're like bigger and more well known actually makes it even harder to operate in some of these like countries and to actually get this data.
Interesting. So you're almost kind of acting in a weird way as a solution to like the dead internet theory, where the problem is now all of the training data, if it's all been used up and you don't have enough authentic data, you're not going to be able to train the newest models. So you're essentially trying to solve that a little bit.
Yeah, I would say so. None of this data is like stuff that you could just like easily find, right? It's not like call center data. Well, our data is like stuff that we've had to like even just like re-engineer how to record stuff in order to get this data. And it's funny because right now the platform that we're on, when we built our first MVP, like we tried to use this recording platform, right? And then we quickly found like, quality, latency, like all these things, and that like it wouldn't work out. So yeah.
Interesting. And I'm also curious, like, how are you deciding which languages to focus on first? Is it based on like where the current data is lacking, cultural representation? Do you have like a particular area you're focusing on in that?
So in the beginning, like when we first started doing YC, right, it was, very much like heuristics driven of like, okay, which language has the most speakers? And then you look at, okay, how much would it cost to get that data? And then you sort of like do like a stack rank and go from there. As time went on, it was really simply just listening to our customers, right? They would have their own, rank of these are the languages that we want, and we go with that. And I think you'll also see, it's interesting, like some languages, without revealing like who, but like let's just say like certain sovereign like wealth funds have more of like an incentive to like really push for like, okay, we want to get our language like out there into these models. We want to make sure there's enough data there. So that's another piece. The final thing I'll say is that even now, English data is still in demand, which is kind of crazy, right? It's sort of like unexpected. Like I would have thought that, okay, English data has been, there's enough of it. But that's not true. So, as part of multilingual, English actually still is part of the languages that we do.
Interesting, interesting. And I think what's cool about your company almost is like so many companies, their product, right, their end result ends up being something very flashy and something that's very easy to see the result of. For you guys, it's a little harder, right, because you're actually building the data layer. So how do you keep your like conviction so high when it's tougher to see the direct results, if you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. So, well, maybe I can speak like conviction in general, right? And I think it's probably the case in most startups, right? Especially in the beginning, it's like it ebbs and flows, right? Because you sort of have to do this impossible thing of like, yes, you have absolute conviction, but at the same time, you need to be flexible enough to like constantly challenge that, right? So I will say like that's probably like a more of an ebb and flow. But after that, it's really when you can see the customers like ask for it, right? And like what they can do with it, now you're sort of like, okay, yeah, I see where my data is going. But also because, we ourselves are researchers at Mundo, right? Like we have researchers on our team. So we understand when we get this data and like we're listening it to it ourselves, we're just going like wow, okay, like holy shit, like this is some like high quality stuff that like I can imagine that other people simply would not be able to get this type of data. And sort of in those moments you have this natural conviction of like, okay, yeah, this is something that the world doesn't have and we have it, and combine that with the customers and then what they're able to build. I think that generally builds conviction.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point you bring up where in startups, there's so much talk about having conviction in your idea and what you believe in. But there's also this note of you need to be willing to pivot and be willing to be agile. But these things kind of go against each other because the stronger you have conviction in your idea, the less willing you are to pivot and the less willing you are to try the things. So I think, yeah, being able to maintain and have that conviction is really important. So when you guys succeed, what do you think is going to change about the underlying AI models? So let's say you're able to make these really massive data sets in other languages. What is fundamentally going to change about how these other models work?
Yeah, I think well, maybe let me hop back to the last point that you made about, holding these two different ideas. You know, I think that's a spot where having good co-founders matters a lot because in the team you naturally can have that balance, right? Sometimes, we all sort of like ebb and flow into like conviction and confidence and stuff and like holding different ideas. And having co-founders that you can riff things off of really like helps with that dynamic. To your point of how these models will change, I think the biggest thing is, well, I'm hoping these models can speak other languages very fluently, right? And I mean like down to like a local dialect, right? Or like a local accent, right? Like the goal here is that if you ask 100 locals to listen to this voice, they'd be like, oh yeah, that's also like a local. And not only that, but the expressiveness, right? The emotions and being able to understand the subtle cues as you're speaking. So think about a therapist, right? Where really they're just like getting you to open up. But when they're doing that, they're picking up on like subtle cues of like, okay, are you hesitating? Do you still want to talk? All of this, I think, would be sort of the end goal of what we're trying to achieve in every language.
That's a really good point. I just imagine now, like when you say that, I'd imagine just like when you mentioned dialects and stuff, I'd imagine how this could be such a strong technical challenge for languages, especially in cultures where there are a lot of different dialects, like Chinese, for example. And I just imagine where there are different regions of China where just because yes they're speaking Mandarin doesn't mean that it sounds the same. Like for example, like Shanghai, people call it like Shanghainese. It's like its own dialect. It's a totally almost close to like a different language. And so I'd imagine that must be a pretty strong technical challenge as well. If now not only do you need to collect, for example, people speaking Mandarin, but you have to collect people speaking in totally different dialects across different regions. How are you approaching that, and how do you imagine that would scale?
Yeah, totally. So again, I think when it comes to, I guess, the more detailed dialects, accent and stuff, we still do optimize for, hey, what are the larger dialects, right? Like maybe at some point as a company, we're large and stable enough that we can go on a mission of like saving long lost like dialects or like these rare obscure accents maybe. But as of right now, we are still focusing on the main ones. But yeah, you're right. Like it is a challenge, and like to add another challenge on top of that, it's like what people report their accent to be is also not always true. And so you sort of have this this problem like, okay, first we need to maybe I just have like the ontology, right? Like what are the different accents, dialects? First define that. Then on an operational point of view, go to these places and actually find people to, who fit these different areas. And then finally being able to like confirm and double check that to be true. But yeah, like these are all definitely like things that, keep me up at night because like if I think about like you give a researcher one thing that's like mislabeled, it really messes with the model. And so yeah, like we do sort of start with the more common and the bigger accents first, and we try to tag it as best we can, and then we communicate that to our customers. But if they want like really specific guarantees, which we have seen before, that sort of almost requires like another level of review and bringing in like language experts to be able to do that.
I'm curious as it pertains to like the quality of your data.
Hmm.
What because you kind of mentioned a lot about quality, and if you have a mislabeled set of data, it can mess a lot of things up. What other approaches are you taking to make sure that your voice data is of high quality?
Yeah, so obviously, as we've worked with these major labs more and like gotten their feedback, like we internally just have like a better idea. At the end of the day, it is still, what do the researchers think, right? I think we're not arrogant enough to be like, no, like this is actually what you want, right? What you need, right? Like we get the client feedback, and like we work together, we're collaborative. Because we work with different labs, we're also careful to like, have a wall, right? Like we're not sharing like what each lab is like looking for specifically. And we really just go down that route of like, okay, what does the customer want? What we might be able to like make certain suggestions here or there. For example, like, okay, this noise floor is just next to impossible because you are going to be in a anechoic chamber to be able to get to that noise floor. And if you have any mics in there, just like the electrical signals or whatever like that are going through there, you'll pick up the buzzing, right? Like we'll make like recommendations like that. Um, but ultimately, I think, in terms of like high quality, it is what the client wants, and there's some like universal benchmarks, right? Obviously, um, you want to record in your raw format, be able to capture the whole dynamic range. You also want to have like no background noise. All of these are like fairly standard things, but then you get into the specifics, which I think are more like client and lab specific.
That makes sense. Yeah. I kind of want to take a step back and ask a little bit about how you and your co-founders met and a bit about your YC experience. So how did you guys first meet, and what was the inspiration you had behind this idea to apply?
Yeah, so the initial four of us were me, Gareth, Jason, and Naj. And I actually met Jason a while ago. And so I met Gareth and Naj through Jason. It is a bit of a funny story. Like, I think I'm probably like 5 or 6 years older than Jason. And so we actually went to the same school, and we were both in this program called the Strategy Consulting Mentorship Program. So that's both when, we both were, in the business world trying to do like management consulting. And going through that program, essentially, it's like a rigorous training camp. And then if you pass it, we guarantee you first round interviews at, the MBB management consulting firms. And I was one of the alums who, passed the program, like came back to mentor for the program. And Jason was actually one of the students who was going through this program. And I remember, I think my first interaction with him was him saying to me, "Oh, cool, we have the same white polo that we're both wearing right now." I remember like my first reaction was like, wow, that's like a really awkward thing to say to, meeting somebody for the first time. But that was like our first sort of connection there. And obviously he did super well throughout the program. But then we sort of lost touch when I decided to level up and go back to school and actually learn computer science. So super big shift for me, going from like, okay, studying finance, working in finance, and being like, okay, when I start from zeros and ones, when I learn some math, learn how to code, all of this. Yeah, so I went back to school, learned how to code, worked at, some of the big tech companies, whatever. And I decided to join a quantitative hedge fund. And I remember while I was there, randomly, one day, Jason rolls through the door at this quantitative hedge fund. And I was just so surprised. I was like, what the hell? Like, I did this big pivot. I did all these things. Now I'm here. And then he's here. Did he also did like a big pivot or something? And that was super crazy. But then that was how we reconnected again. And ultimately he didn't join back at the firm, and I was there as a full-time employee. He was there as an intern. He didn't come back, but while I was there, one day he just messaged me and he was like, "Hey, got this idea. Yeah, I was doing research at Tsinghua. There doesn't seem to be like a lot of data for non-English languages, and I'm thinking about applying to YC. What do you think? And then we reconnected there. And the rest of it is history. Like I had to choose within like 2 or 3 weeks to quit my job and do this. So that was like another fun story. But yeah.
So I'm guessing you got into YC right first, and then you realized like, oh my god, I have to quit my job. What was the interview experience like for you, and like getting into YC? Like I think I've asked everyone this in the batch I've talked to. Is it's I think such an interesting experience, that moment you get the phone call or the email that basically says you're in, and you just like, wow, my whole life is about to change right now. And I think every person I've talked to just has such a fond memory of the night that they got in and like celebrating with their co-founders. Yeah. So what was that like for you?
Yeah, so, I think it's funny because like up to that point, I don't think that I knew as much about YC as my co-founders did. And like maybe this is like a reflection of my career choices where like you start off in like finance was like the most rigid like bullshit thing ever. And I started to like slowly shift to like, okay, I want to learn how to build things because the like things feel so empty. I want to like learn how to create. And like, yeah, well, I knew like entrepreneurship was like a route. It didn't occur to me that there were these like accelerators that like, funded these things. So I like inkling of an understanding of YC. But I do remember that the application process was just way different from anything else that I've applied to, right? Even the questions, or like what did you hack, right? Like these things was like, okay, that's interesting. I never had to like, it seems sort of like casual. And
Yeah.
then even the interview as well, right? Where I remember it was interview time. I was at the office. I quickly like went down for the lobby. I was like, okay, shit. I hope like none of my coworkers, see me doing this. And it was like a super quick interview, right? Like rapid fire, and we would get like cut off on answers. I'm like, I can't tell if this is like going well or not. Like, are we getting cut off because like we suck, or like, it was just kind of random. And then after we did I remember just like not thinking much, right? I was like, okay, I can't really tell how that went. It seems like they were diving deep, so they're like asking more questions, but at the same time, it seemed like they were like pushing really hard. So the vibes were, I'm not sure. But then after we got in, Jason called me. I was like, holy shit, like that's unexpected, right?
Yeah.
Really unexpected, and maybe as a Canadian, where our venture scene is like kind of dead, right? To think that like, oh, they're just like tossing like $500,000 for like 15 to 20 minute like interview. It's like, yeah, sure, that's great, but also like wow, right? Just like surprising. And then of course, after things settle, I remember we like went to like I think it was Earl's to like meet up, grab some food, and after things settled, it's like, oh shit, well now now have to like actually make a decision, right? Like drop everything and do this thing or not, and yeah, we just start from there.
That's an awesome story. I think what's so interesting, like for people that aren't as familiar with YC, they're so surprised every time they learn about the interview process. And the idea that you literally, like, for those of you watching this that don't know, you just go online, you essentially fill out what is equivalently like a fancy Google form, and then you either get rejected or you get an interview. And if you get an interview, it is literally 10 minutes long. And then they make their decision for whether they fund you with $500,000 or not. And like, it's such an interesting thing because compared to like getting an entry level job as like a SWE or something, where you have to first submit your resume and the application, and then you get like an OA, and then you get like a second OA, and then you go through like 3 or 4 rounds of interviews, and then there maybe is like a team match versus literally just filling out a form and hopping on a 10-minute call and then getting $500,000 in funding from the most prestigious startup accelerator in the world is a very it's a very unique thing. It's very interesting. And I think it's like why they try to do this though, because there's a reason behind it, of course, is that if they make it have a lot of people don't believe they're going to get into YC, even those that are very qualified with very good ideas. But if they add a bunch of friction to it and make it difficult, all these people are not going to do it. But now, because it's literally just a form online, like when applying, I never thought I would get into YC. Like, no, not in a million years. But because it was just so easy, it's like, what do you have to lose? It's a form. You could do it in like an hour or two. And even if like this is not really the proper way to look at it, but if you look at it from a perspective of like the acceptance rate and what your expected value is, we know YC roughly has a 1% acceptance rate, a little less, but let's just for the sake of argument say 1%. And if I say, okay, let's say it takes me 2 hours to fill out the form. Okay, now we take the $500,000 of funding, we take with the 1% acceptance rate. Well, my expected value on filling out this form is like $5,000. So, or $2,500 an hour, right? So it's like, yeah, it's a pretty worthwhile thing to do. Of course, for most people, their odds of being accepted to YC are not 1%. It's either vastly higher than 1% or vastly, vastly lower than 1%, depending obviously on your idea, your team, your background, and all that. But for those of you that like doubt if you should do it, it's fill out the damn form. It takes you like an hour or two if you're being lazy.
Yeah, no, totally. I think like we have stories of people applying late, right?
Yeah.
Like like literally just, throw in like an application, like just give it your best. It does make me curious, like on the back end, how are they reviewing all these applications? That's what I want to know.
I agree. I've always been so curious about this. Like, we don't have any insights in this as well. Like, even going through the batch, like they don't tell us like what their actual software is or what they're looking for. We can only just guess based on their batchmates. But I'd imagine it is like very difficult to review 10,000 plus applications because there's not that many YC partners and they are the ones reviewing the applications. Obviously, I'm guessing there's some preemptive sorters where if you're someone that's like, oh, I went to Stanford CS, okay, that's going to help a lot. That's going to be a big boost. Or I had a previous exit or things like that. I would imagine there's some like filtering, but it's not just based on people's backgrounds. Like I think they're looking mainly, if I can get the vibe from this, is like they want interesting people that just have something unique and interesting about them. And I think that was like the reason we got in, just because our partner was like, you guys are kind of like different. Like we're very like travel obsessed people. And we were just talking about like on my, what did you hack question? I'm like, yeah, I flew around the world, 20 plus countries, first class, business class. And it's just like something that's just different and unique because that's what they're looking for. But I wonder as well, like what are the factors that they are and how they're able to sort these applications.
Yeah. Yeah. You agree?
What was like in the batch as a research startup? How do you think that was a bit different than a traditional like AI B2B SaaS, for example?
Well, I wouldn't say we're totally research. Like we don't build models, right? And like
Yeah.
we still are just focused on the data. So I actually do think there's like a lot of similarities, in terms of like you're hitting up these large companies and you're going through their corporate directory, see who you can get connected to, trying to find the like a champion and sort of going from there. But maybe the difference there is like if we think about who our ideal champion is at these companies, it's the researchers. And so it was tricky where sort of like, okay, we want to talk to the researchers, but they're the most like heavily guarded, and they're guarded by all these different like business people who they themselves also have like their own like incentives, right? And having to navigate that. But the core principles are the same, right? You have like a bit of like a demo, right? And you want to make this demo as easy to do and share as possible. And, you really hope that, okay, whoever you're in contact with, maybe it's easy for them to share with the researcher the demo data, something like that. But also just going through our own networks and reaching out and being like, hey, what's interesting? And making some guesses there. Because like you'll hear like, industry rumblings of like, hey, maybe a smaller voice focused research lab has come up with this new thing. Maybe they publish a paper, you go look at it and you're like, oh, okay, like maybe this might be interesting. And then you add it to the demo and then you just like keep on iterating from there. But ultimately, it is still like a similar process of like, I feel like at least the B2B SaaS where like you just have to like talk to these people and like, hey, look at this, and then go from there.
Yeah, just doing the cold email, trying to find. Yeah. That's I always wondered like what it would be like building a consumer startup in the batch, just because I would imagine it'd be like so different. But that totally makes sense. What else like what else like in the batch do you think? Just tell me a bit about your like experience in the batch and what it was like for you.
Um, my experience during the batch was, if I could use one word to describe, how I felt coming out of it, it was like hopeful. And the reason why I say hopeful, like I think there are two distinct moments in my life where like I felt this. One was when I went back to school to study comp sci, and this was like just before I think the when COVID hit. And right before COVID hit, big tech wasn't as like hyped because I think the zero interest rate stopped and then like all of a sudden tech got super hyped. But before that, the program that I joined was called BCS, which is essentially teaching comp sci from 0 to 1 for people who already had a degree. And the people in there were people who were like already lawyers or who were like practicing doctors. And they decided to join this like, program where you start from like undergrad math. And meeting those people and hearing them say like, yeah, I did this because I think the cure to cancer lies in computational biology. So I'm a doctor. I don't know anything about computation or like comp sci, and I'm going to learn it now. So in that moment, that's like the first time I had this, feeling of hope that like, okay, the world's gonna be better. The second time I felt that is in YC, where you're just surrounded with people where they're just so cracked, right? And like, yes, a lot of it is like B2B SaaS, whatever, but there's also like a subset of like, hard tech and everything else that just makes you think like, okay, wow, the world really has the talent and the people and batchmates that I've met have all just been like incredibly sincere and authentic as well. So you put all that together and it's like I was like, okay, I am hopeful for humanity because I think like these are the people that we need to solve some crazy challenges. So I remember that was like a overwhelming feeling of mine coming out of it, hope.
I think that's a great point. Like in YC, the best part about it, of course, is all your batchmates and all the people that you're going to have these connections with and meet. And like every single person that I met in the batch is cracked. Like every single one without fail. They are all super interesting, unique, really smart people that are like, as you said, extremely sincere. And meeting these people, I think, is like the best part of the batch, just having this network that you've built kind of for life and being surrounded by all this amazing talent. I think another thing for me that was like really surprising about YC is I don't know, maybe this was just me, but the perception of startups in the SF tech scene is always like we're not sleeping, we're grinding 24/7, screw everything else. I don't care about your health, I don't care about anything else. We're just grinding, we're just shipping product. But it was actually like very different in YC where I did not get the vibe that they want you to be unhappy and to just grind 24/7. It's much more of like, look, you need to treat yourself as like more seriously, and like your health actually matters because you're going to ship worse product, right? Like I think some of the advice even in like YC is like you should spend some of the investment on like a gym membership so you can be healthier, and you should make sure like no matter what you're getting a good amount of sleep. And I really appreciated like just how supportive the entire atmosphere was. You never felt this feeling of they were trying to pit like any type of like competitiveness against the companies, even companies that are like working in similar areas. I never felt an era or like anything of people trying to be competitive. I don't know. It was just felt like an extremely collaborative environment.
Yeah, totally. I think they really take the long-term view, right? And like, what's long-term good? You want this to be sustainable and all of that. It does make me curious, like, because as YC gets more well known, right, then you might start to attract like, a certain like archetype of founder or something like that, right? Like, and I really hope that doesn't change. And going back to my experience on doing this, going back to learn comp sci and stuff, like I saw that happen in real time where COVID hit, big tech became super popular, and all of a sudden the new people who joined the program, they were no longer like, okay, I want to cure cancer. They were like, fang or bust, right? And then like it's just a completely like different demographic. And so, like when I think about YC and that like authenticity, right? It's like people who actually like do want to build stuff, right? As opposed to like cosplaying what a founder or a builder is. And yeah, like going forward, like I just do hope that the community still stays, tight knit, and that the culture carries forward, because I think that's super important.
That totally makes sense. I could imagine like as yeah, YC becomes just so well known, being a founder becomes this kind of like glorified thing, and people are gonna be like, oh, I want to be a YC founder. And they're gonna apply, and they're just doing it like, yeah, as thing or bust, right? YC or bust. We're doing YC, or we're not doing a startup. They don't want to like, and I don't feel like that's been the case, but I could totally imagine, and that totally makes sense. Because yeah, the best part about being in YC is just having this like, I think it was just so interesting. Like one of my favorite things was hearing all the other companies and their ideas. There was just every company I heard talk was just like, wow, that is a cool idea. Like every single one. I remember like, if you remember like Red Barn Robotics in their batch, in the
Ah,
batch, and they were
yeah.
building like Roomba for weeds on a farm, and Splash Inc., who's like building autonomous boats. Like I love the hardware companies. Like that is so,
Yeah.
everyone is like so cool. And I think it's just really interesting hearing like everyone's idea. And every time you hear it, it's just like, oh, why didn't I think of that? Like that's a really like clear and good idea. And I think like one of the most interesting skills they teach you in YC is like the ability to communicate as clearly and concisely as possible, because it's such a useful skill in everything related to a startup. One, demoing your product. No one wants to sit on like a 45-minute sales call if you're just rambling and going on and on about the product and you're not able to communicate it. And it's the reason I think why the interviews are only 10 minutes, because it's a very good test of you. Do you have this ability? Can you convey your product and your idea and what you want to work on in 10 minutes? Because if you can't, well, you maybe need to work on that before becoming a startup founder.
Yeah, no, totally. And I imagine this is like is especially true if yeah, you're the CEO who's, talking and pitching to a lot of investors, right? And you have to do this rep so many times. And it's also, I think, a good way to cut through like the charlatans, right? People who are just like, I imagine like in their brains probably like they're like an LLM and they're just like piecing together words that sound good. But then, like, when you cut through it, what is of substance is actually very condensed into just a few lines. And yeah, it just cuts through a lot of the BS.
Exactly, exactly. Like I would imagine there's just there's this perception of like when you do these interviews, like people need to like sound really smart, and that's the goal. Their goal is to just, how smart can I sound? How many cool buzzwords can I put together? But it's like they see through that immediately, and the whole point is like you need to actually dumb down the language. That's what they want to see, is like you should go in there and not use any specific jargon. You don't need to come off as like you're mega hyper and way more intelligent than everyone else. You're just supposed to be able to communicate clearly and concisely. And I think that's what like really helps give you an advantage in the interview.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, Kenneth, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate the opportunity to interview you, and I wish you the best of luck with Mundo AI.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. This was really fun. Thanks.